let's maybe paint the picture of what you see in the future, 2028, looking back to where we are today. What's happened if Trump wins? What's actually happened if Biden wins re-election? And help paint that picture for us.
Well, I think that economically, the country is robust under Trump. It's still got a problem potentially because Trump has proven not to be this, the debt pay down guy that he claimed he would be. But let's say he gets back on his bearing on that and starts doing that. I think we're going to see a reduced amount of borrowing, a reduced amount of debt. We're going to see more economic opportunity. I believe we're going to see some major changes which will make our products more competitive with foreign products, which means more jobs here, higher wages, higher productivity, more investment in the U.S. If Biden wins, I'm concerned.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on the Brian Nichols Show. Thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by our friends over at Amp America, folks. Stop letting the corporate media fill your mind with garbage. You don't need to go ahead and support them with your clicks and your attention. So please head over to ampamerica.com. You can find podcasts, opinion pieces, news articles, and more. And it's the stuff you need to know without the corporate media bias or fluff. And we are proud here at the Brian Nichols Show to have them as one of our leading sponsors, ampamerica.com. Also, the Brian Nichols Show is powered by Cardio Miracle, which is, yes, the best heart health supplement in the world. If you're looking to lower your blood pressure, lower that resting heart rate, get better nights of sleep, maybe a more improved pump at the gym, stick around. We're going to talk about all that and more later in the episode. But first, today we have a good episode in store for you. And with that, it's a returning guest here to the program. We're talking about what's going to happen here. Fast forward to November 2024. Biden, does he get reelected, or does Donald Trump come back? Is he going to pull a William Howard Taft, right? He was the one who bookended his presidencies. Maybe Trump's going to be the first president in over 100 plus years to do so. But with that, let's talk about, from a tax standpoint, the actual ramifications of a Biden presidency moving forward another 4 years. Will it be Biden or a Trump presidency coming back here for another 4 years? To discuss all that and more, returning from fairtax.com, Steve Hayes. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you been?
Brian, I'm doing great. Thank you.
.org, by the way. Fairtax.org. I'll get it right, Steve, after the fifth time you're on the show. I promise.
Editorial comment, Brian. It was Grover Cleveland.
Grover Cleveland. Yeah, I needed that. It's early morning, by the way, folks, when we're recording here on a Saturday. So I got some bats in the belfry there. Steve, what would I do without you? Thanks for joining the show. What's new, Steve? How you been? And what's new at fairtax.org?
Well, we're finally at a point, as we've talked before, where we're getting enough attention. The Democrats, when I testified before Congress, set it up in a scripted manner where they attacked me but never gave me a chance to respond. And so that's good, because they're starting to get concerned that their house of cards, which they've called the Internal Revenue Code, which they've used as a piggy bank, not just the Democrats, both sides. They talk about how they're going to change the way, let's just say, podcasts are taxed. They're going to make you recognize income even if you don't have it because you should have had it. I mean, that's the kind of logic some of these people have. And your industry sends money to say, no, don't do that. So it's like an ATM machine. And frankly, the big guys and gals who have vested interest put immense amounts of money into the system, the realtors, the various groups, and they really don't want to give that up. And that's not just the Democrats. That's the Republicans as well, who may benefit equally from the system in terms of donations. The real problem they're having, though, and they're starting to recognize it, is even though they mocked me when I said that we had a study showing it was over $1 trillion a year, and that their former commissioner had validated that 3 years ago. They mocked me, and I said, well, your own IRS study shows it's over 700 billion. So it's not like, I'm making something up multiple times. But they weren't interested in hearing that. They were interested only in talking points and how it needs to be more fair. And to be honest, some of the Republicans did the same thing by talking about how much they supported the Trump tax cuts. So it really wasn't about reform as much as it was posturing for them. But overall, we're making progress because we were testifying, and more people, Brian, are seeing that this is a broken system.
It is.
And are looking for alternatives. I mean, I saw your interview with Scott Hodge, who I haven't talked to in a long time, but Scott and I used to debate this. Scott is he's becoming more of a fan of moving to something similar to the fair tax, but he's more of a fan of working with the present system. I used to tell him, yes, because if we didn't do that and we went to the fair tax, you would not have a job because the tax foundation, he was good natured about it. Don't get me wrong, but he would, whatever. That's not true. But that's the problem with a lot of these groups in DC. When I first started going to DC, Brian, before many of your listeners were born in 1990, I met with a bunch of people like Scott who are still making their living talking about the present income tax system. If the present income tax system was gone and we had a national consumption tax, there'd be nothing to talk about. They'd have to find other topics, and they're bright guys. They could easily do that. But, Scott's very bright. And so they could go into more economic areas, but they would be in areas that actually benefited people as opposed to a tax system that oppresses people.
Steve, let me play devil's advocate on Scott's behalf here, because he's not here to defend himself today. But how much does the role of incrementalism play in terms of the differences between you and Scott? And here's the context behind that question, because to your starting off point, the fair tax, it does make sense, right? It's more of the consumption tax. It's what you actually are using versus just, hey, we're going to give you a 40% tax rate because you earned too much last year. Versus where Scott, I think, and I'm doing my best to present his argument on his behalf while he's not here, but the fact that we have such an archaic backward system that going from point A to point Z overnight is going to be incredibly difficult. So we need to have incremental approaches from A to B to C to M to Z. And it's going to take some time, but to get people on board, if we were to do a complete rip and replace, and let's use my sales analogies, right? If I would go to a customer and I say, hey, we're going to go ahead and redo your entire technology stack tomorrow, they're going to look at me like, no, because I, number one, need to make sure it's done properly. But number two, we got to just get comfortable with this change. So is there a part of this that factors into the disagreements, even though they are on the same side of the conversation, but maybe that's more of the difference there versus anything, of, I don't say real substance, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty, if that makes sense?
Well, I think the key is obviously, as Scott has discussed, in the details.
Hey folks, I want to take a moment to talk about something that has truly changed my life, and that is Cardio Miracle, our incredible studio sponsor. Now, I'll be honest, when I first heard about Cardio Miracle and their claims about improving heart health, I was skeptical, but after using it for just about 2 months, I was absolutely blown away by the results. First, my blood pressure went from being consistently around 140/90 to a much more healthier and manageable 120/80. And my resting heart rate dropped from the low 70s to the high 50s. And I couldn't believe it. But the benefits didn't stop there. I started sleeping better, and I felt more energized at the gym, and my heart felt the best it's felt in years. And it's not just me. Hundreds of you, our amazing listeners, have reached out to share your own incredible experiences with Cardio Miracle. So, what is Cardio Miracle? And how does it work? It's a carefully crafted supplement that harnesses the power of nitric oxide to support optimal heart function. So, by increasing nitric oxide levels in your blood, Cardio Miracle helps relax your blood vessels, improve circulation, and it protects your heart from damage. It's like giving your heart the support it needs to function at its best. And here's the best part. We've got an exclusive offer just for you, our loyal listeners here at the Brian Nichols Show. When you head over to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout, you'll get an extra 15% discount on your order. Plus, with their 100% money-back guarantee, you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So, if you're ready to take control of your heart health and experience the life-changing benefits of Cardio Miracle for yourself, just click the link in the show notes or video description. Trust me, your heart will thank you. And don't wait another day to prioritize your health. Join the tens of thousands of folks who have already discovered the Cardio Miracle difference. Head to cardiomiracle.com now and use code TBNS for 15% off your order. Your journey to a happier and healthier heart starts today. And now, let's get back to the show.
And your point is very, very good, because what we're doing is taking a paradigm that's been frankly, in all of our lives, the living people now, since we started, and the paradigm has been the income tax system. We've grown accustomed. It's the devil we know. What we also know, though, is that in 45 states in the District of Columbia, the fair tax is simply an excise tax, a retail sales tax. Well, that's what's in existence. We have grown up with that since the early 30s. And so frankly, you're not talking about something people aren't familiar with. You know, Scott's point is that if you go, let's say, December 31st to January 1st, you're going to have some real upheaval, because you've got a lot of products that were manufactured when all of the government costs had to be included. The labor cost of Social Security, all of the income tax markups that were in the price, somewhere between 15 and 25%. And my argument back to them was, look, we've got a provision in the bill, which is a transition provision, which allows any inventory at the crossover point to not have to collect the fair tax, because that doesn't have the benefit of having the prices reduced. So there is a way to do the transition. And what Scott's talking about is very clear. My argument back, whether it was to Steve Forbes, or I don't know if I ever was on a panel with Scott directly, but not just personally, but has always been incremental change in DC almost never works. They get the fire on their tails that they need to change, and they say, okay, we're going to change over 5-10 years. Once that fire goes out, they say, oh, well, we don't really think it's a good idea to get rid of that next part of the income tax, but we do like the fact that the sales tax raises a lot of money. We're going to bump that rate and keep the sales tax and the income tax. I mean, Ben Cardin from Maryland, who's certainly not a conservative, called me and wanted to meet, and he had come up with a proposal. He was going to have he modeled it on ours. He was quite frank about it. Retail sales tax, up to $100,000 of income, you would pay nothing but the retail sales tax. It had a prebate, and then it was going to have an income tax on income over $100,000. And he had three rates. I forget what they were, 10, 15, and 25, I believe. And then he was going to have a value-added tax replacing the corporate tax. And he was going to do this because he said, look, if I've done this, don't you think I've handled most of the evasion, or a big chunk of it? Because it typically happens under 100,000 of income. You're in that range. And I said, yes, I think you've done it. You've done a big thing on it. And haven't I been better for our trade balance? In other words, the present system punishes our exports and rewards imports, because when foreign countries ship goods here, they give back their value-added tax to the exporter. They come over here and we don't tax them. So therefore, you've got a situation where his value-added tax and his sales tax went a long way toward helping U.S. manufacturers compete. All those things were true. But he went radio silent after about the third meeting. And I later found out, this was in 2015, that he had gone radio silent because he had been talking to Hillary, who was a presumptive president. And she was going to make that part of her economic package, and she didn't want anybody else to be involved. So obviously Trump won, and it wasn't part of the economic package, that he could get through. Now, to Trump's defense, a lot of things that he wanted to do, he wasn't able to do because of Mitch McConnell and the House. They basically just weren't willing to go along with him. And he ended up going, I don't know, halfway, but certainly not what he had been talking about doing with the income tax and the estate tax. He wanted to get rid of it, period. Instead, they gave him a big allowance, they put in. And the withholding tax, the standard deduction went way up. And Kevin Brady, when I talked to him about it, he was chairman of the Ways and Means then, said, Steve, I'm doing your job because I'm getting people where they're not reliant on what they think are deductions. Because we've just taken away 60, 70% of the people who were itemizing and allowed them to take the standard deduction. And Kevin had been a sponsor of the Fair Tax before he became chairman. And so I think you've got to look at that. And I think to a point that most people need to consider is that you've got two incredibly big contrasts, not only in the way they view government. Biden believes everything starts and stops with a government bureaucrat. He has out Obama'd about 3 times in terms of regulatory cost and time to handle a company's business. Trump, on the other hand, had reduced the amount of regulatory time and was cutting it. In fact, if he had been in office another 4 years, we were talking about somebody succeeding him, we would probably have seen a huge difference in the regulatory state. I also think we would have seen a huge difference in the present tax system. We know with Biden, he is going to increase taxes. He's going to raise taxes at the corporate level, assuming he's elected and gets a Congress that'll go along with him, because he can hide the taxes on those people he says he's not taxing. Because we know what happens, Brian, when they increase taxes at the corporate level or at the business level. Businesses, unlike government, can't print money, not stay in business by borrowing money very long if they can't pay it back. So they have to either raise prices, reduce their dividends or their own income, or cut employees, or not give them wages that are increasing. They don't have any other choice. Those are the 3 pockets they can get money from. He wants to do that because he knows that Amazon and these other companies are going to try to pass the cost on to you and I. And then he will stand in Congress in his next State of the Union and say, those dirty corporations are the reasons that your prices are up 10%. When frankly, that 10% was his tax increase. Now, Trump, on the other hand, is a business person. He doesn't come from the bureaucrat frame of mind that everything should be handled by a young person who hasn't had a job since they mowed lawns or babysat, other than in government, because they're a lot smarter than we are. And Trump doesn't believe that at all, because he's dealt with these people all his life, trying to get permits, trying to get things done. And he believes that what you need to do is untie people, that's regulations. But he also believes that if you're going to tax people, you need to tell them. And corporate taxes do not do anything except help hide the taxes. And that, I think, is the major difference between Trump and Biden's policy. Biden wants to increase more money to the government because he believes only the government knows what's best for us. Trump looks at it and says the government is the problem. We want to reduce the amount it takes from the American people while still maintaining defense and the infrastructure that we have. So I think there are huge differences between Trump's approach to taxes and Biden's approach to taxes. Obama looks pretty good compared to Biden. But basically, that's the main thing.
So one of the things, Steve, for this episode, right, we're not necessarily going into the debate, but I think Scott and you need to have a debate here on the show at some point, or at least a friendly conversation. That would be a lot of fun. Oh, yeah, and Scott's a great human being. You're a great human being, so I know it'd be a great conversation. But let's talk about, I'm going to give you, and I don't know if folks know this, I have access to a time machine, Steve. So I'm going to give you this time machine, and I want you to do us a favor. Fast forward to 2028, and I want you to look at two parallel universes. One in which Donald Trump wins re-election, the second election, much like Grover Cleveland. Thank you for correcting me. Or let's go to the other universe. Joe Biden miraculously at the tender age of 80, God knows what, wins re-election, and he's going to give us another 4 years. So we have 4 years of both Trump and Biden to look back on and at least judge what they were able to do and what they might do in the future. And you outlined exactly what happened, the context behind why things happened. But let's maybe paint the picture of what you see in the future, 2028, looking back to where we are today. What's happened if Trump wins? What's actually happened if Biden wins re-election? And help paint that picture for us.
Well, I think that economically, the country is robust under Trump. It's still got a problem potentially because Trump has proven not to be this, the debt pay down guy that he claimed he would be. But let's say he gets back on his bearing on that and starts doing that. I think we're going to see a reduced amount of borrowing, a reduced amount of debt. We're going to see more economic opportunity. I believe we're going to see some major changes which will make our products more competitive with foreign products, which means more jobs here, higher wages, higher productivity, more investment in the U.S. If Biden wins, I'm concerned that because of his idea, again, that only government knows best, that you're going to see more and more attempts to take money out of the economy. You're going to see more and more willingness to expand even more rapidly the national debt because he's going to want to do like the Romans did back when they were having problems before they collapsed, and that is feed the people. He's going to cancel student loans. He's going to give money to podcasters. He's going to give money to lawyers. He's going to do everything with printed money to help make an appearance that we're doing okay. But it's going to become an appearance, a balloon that's going to collapse of its own weight. And frankly, I think a much less free country because you're going to be ruled more and more by, again, some bureaucrat who's never held a job in the private sector, who basically thinks that he's smarter than you are and he'll tell you what to do. And I think that's the biggest contrast, not only economically, but from a civil liberties point of view, between where we'll be in 2028 under a Biden. And I don't think it'll be Biden. I think it'll be Harris, because I don't believe he'll make it through the term. And that's even worse.
Yes. Yes. By the way, yes, it would be even worse with that cackling VP we have. But continue. Sorry.
No. But with Trump, you also have to look at who he picks as the vice president because Trump is 78.
Yep.
And he's a go-getter. He's still got a lot of energy. He still loves his Big Macs apparently, and he still, Big Mac, like milkshake and fries. But here's a guy who wears people out 40 years younger than he is. But, it can happen with him. But I believe whoever he picks for vice president will be someone who will continue the mold that he's set. And I think you're going to have a much better opportunity for more personal freedom and more economic freedom and a more prosperous America.
Vivek Ramaswamy?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I don't think so. I like the way he comes across, but I think it'll be someone. I mean, the person who I listened to was very impressed with Doug Burgum from North Dakota.
I keep hearing Doug Burgum left and right, by the way. His name is popping up, and I also heard he was bringing his wife to certain events, which that usually doesn't happen unless there might be something working behind the scenes. So
I think that he's being brought in and showcased by Trump in a lot of different. He was at the Bronx with Trump, at the North Carolina GOP convention, which I attended, because we were very close to having a fair tax bill go in North Carolina, a state fair tax. And he was there, gave a great talk. And if you look around, he's becoming more and more present when Trump does these rallies.
Yep.
So I think they're really vetting him. He's a fellow with a similar background. He started, well, not similar. Trump started with made it a lot higher. He started with nothing and built a huge company, very successful company. So I think he's got a lot in common with Trump. I think Trump believes that he's not a politician per se. He's a business person who became a politician like Trump.
And Doug Burgum is how old, Steve? I was actually pulling that up here as you were doing that.
60s, I believe.
Yeah, 60. Here, age 60. Come on, Brian. You can use a computer. 1956. So he's right over the. Actually, he's getting closer to 70, I guess, right?
Yes, he is. He's very close. He's actually 68 then. I thought he was in his mid 60s.
That's credit to him then. He's looking young.
Yes, he is. No, and I was just really impressed. It's the first time I'd ever seen him in person, and I thought he handled himself well. He's not a big, imposing guy at all, but he's dynamic. And he has a good sense of humor, which is very important when you're on the stump like that, and comes across more natural. I don't think there was a teleprompter. I think he was just up there going. And so I was impressed. So my guess is that unless there's something else that comes up, that Burgum's, in my opinion, the front runner. I think Scott and all these other people, there are a lot of them. I mean, Nikki Haley is in the running only because of a constituency that she might bring. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of contrast with she and Trump that would be hard for him.
Well, I think, Steve, elephant in the room, too, Nikki Haley would just push away so many of the base in Trump's voter base because she is antithetical to what Trump represents. I mean, she is the embodiment of the establishment that Trump was saying, I'm going to go in and destroy.
That's right. That's right. Well, and even though she's trying to distance herself from that particular thing, I believe that's an ingrained in concrete belief from a lot of people. So, we could all be surprised. It could be a lady like Tulsi Gabbard or, someone else. But at the same time, I think if Trump had his choice, just because of the way things have been going, it would be Doug Burgum.
All right, Steve. So we're looking at the 2028 and beyond. It's looking like, and I think we all are just, and by the way, this is the common sense that's needed in our conversation right now. Not you and I, but just in our political conversations across the board, is objectively speaking, it looks like we would be much better off if Trump were in fact to win, because not only would we have now a vehicle to help get some of these ideas in, but the people he surrounds himself with are going to be more likely than not to promote these ideas. I mean, the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy is right next to the presidency or former president talking to Trump on a consistent basis, bringing our ideas to the table. I'm saying our being a small L libertarian ideas. I think that's super important. But then you look at other people like a Doug Burgum. You go through the list of folks who surround Trump right now, like a Ben Carson or a Tim Scott. Like they're going to be more on board with bringing this type of solution to the table versus someone like an AOC or a Nancy Pelosi or a Chuck Schumer. They're not looking to do things in a different, better way. They're looking to do more of the same. And frankly, a lot of the establishment GOP is much in that same same spirit. And frankly, that's why we've seen a lot of them, like your Adam Kinzingers, like your Liz Cheney's, jump ship. And they're not supporting Donald Trump. And if anything, they're actually actively supporting his opponent.
Absolutely. And see, the other thing, in fairness, though, we have to look at it. You and I are basically talking to the choir.
Right.
We both have very similar viewpoints. I was a registered libertarian for 30 years in California. So, we're looking at things from that prism. But if you look around, there's a lot of people out there who would have nothing wrong with what Biden, the picture I painted for Biden.
It's true.
Because they're looking at somebody who's going to ensure that they have child care. They're looking at somebody who's going to ensure that if they get laid off, they get as much money as if they were working. Those are the kind of things, and that point of view, that's why we have a divided country. And that's why our views, if represented by Trump, are not 65%. They're 51 to 3% in the polling. I don't think he's anything in a swing state over 53, but he's in that range. That's still a victory. I'm not saying it's wrong, but you got to look at, though, a huge number of our populace don't share our particular views on the role of government. Mm-hmm. They see government needing to be more involved.
But Steve, in this really quick, they still vote, though, right? And that is the challenge that we have to grapple with, is that if we look at what made Trump appealing and what makes Trump appealing today, there is this populist sentiment. And as much as there's a populist sentiment on this side of the aisle, much to your point, there is a populist sentiment on the other side of the aisle. So what's the best way, and how about this? We'll let this be our final question for today as we wrap things up. What is the best way for us to approach the reality that democracy literally is a populist type of governance just put in, codified into law. So 50 plus 1% of a group of folks voting, that's the way we're going to go. Now, granted, we're a democratic republic. I get that. But talking about the fact that we have to grapple with, you more or less have two sides that are constantly competing, and they are all motivated on emotion and incentive structures. When we look at what we're bringing to the table, it just is common sense from a solution standpoint. But on the other side of the aisle, as you outlined, right, the incentive structure to make sure I'm getting what I deserve, that is just as fervent and just as powerful of a message to radicalize and activate that populist left. So what do we do? How do we come to grips with that? And how do we make real headway without, the inevitable pendulum swinging back to the left? Only I'm afraid it's going to go past Obama, past Biden, and on its way straight off to Stalin. Like what's the way we can control that?
Well, as John Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats. The reason that Trump is getting more traction with African Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, is because he's talking about policies that actually have helped them. In other words, it's not theoretical to them. Many of them saw an increase in their ability to compete in their own personal welfare under Trump. And they're not seeing it under Biden. They're seeing high inflation, which is eating into that demographic more than anything else. The inflation has destroyed all of the gains that they made in wages under Trump. And so what you've got now is a situation where the job report comes out, but we lost 600,000 full-time jobs. And we got a lot of part-time jobs, which each count as a new job to make up for it, but not for the full-time job. And a lot of those people who lost those jobs are in those communities. They are seeing it. And so what I believe has to happen is this whole thing that Reagan and Carter did. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? If the answer is yes, re-elect the president. If the answer is no, vote for me. And I think that's what the Democrats most fear, is that you get that kind of a common sense choice. I don't care what demographic you're in. You're highly unlikely to answer that question yes.
Yep. Preach. And by the way, Steve, just the recurring theme for today's episode was an expression we were using, common sense. And I think, I talked about this a few episodes back. We got to get away from the isms, right? And I guess, I I'm still fervently a small L libertarian. I believe in libertarian beliefs, but when you start to go into the ism, that becomes your identity. Whereas I kind of view myself as a common sensationalist, I guess. Like there needs to be this just kind of this normal approach to governance, to society that we can all just look at and be like, yeah, this is common sense. And I think as Ben Shapiro has an expression he's been using on his show called revenge of the normies. And yes, that is exactly what's going to be happening, I feel, because there is a group of folks, and I fervently believe they are in the large majority of just folks who they go along to get along. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. They don't want to rock the boat, but they have at their core common sense. And when they look at what's happening right now, the way our country's progressed, both economically, both socially, culturally, they're not excited. And as a matter of fact, they're getting pretty PO'd. So I'm feeling, and I'm not sure if I'm on the right path here, Steve. And how about this? We'll let this be your final thoughts, and then you can go to a call to action. But I'm hoping that they are mobilized. I'm hoping that they activate here in 2024 and beyond and stay awake, right? Don't vote and then just go back to your eternal slumber of not really caring to the world of politics. Like, you need to get involved, especially if you view yourself as a common sense type of person, because the moment you take a step back, the moment you say, okay, you're Thanos, when he snapped his fingers, he eliminates half the world. And what does he do? He goes to his farm and he just goes and chills. What happens? The Avengers come, they take him out and they fix it, right? But only it's not the Avengers. It's the rabid left. They're going to come back in. They're going to take back over. And instead of fixing it, they're going to bring us right back to where we are today and further. So it is important for you, if you are a normie, if you are a common sensationalist, or whatever the hell I said, please get involved, get active, but most importantly, stay active, stay involved, stay up to date, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your coworkers, because it's going to mean a lot more coming from you, Mr. Average John Doe out there working your day job, or Jane Doe living your life, talking to the local ladies. Like, I need you, we need you to go out and talk to folks, because when you're the ones talking, it means more than coming from me. I'm just a guy with a microphone who yells at the microphone for a living. You can go out there and actually talk to people face to face. Right. I'm going to help teach you how to do it, but I need you to actually go out and do it. And with that, lead with common sense, lead with normality. That's my final thoughts. Steve, what do you have for us on your end?
I can only say that what you've said sums it up very well. There's not a lot I can add, but I do think that the point that is not emphasized enough is what you pointed out about talk to your friends, because many of your friends that are out there are too busy raising their kids, handling other medical issues themselves, perhaps doing things in their business, to really pay enough attention to what's going on. They see the problems, they see it in their business, they see it in their lives, they see it in their friends' lives. They see people being laid off, having to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep up with what they were doing 4 years before. But they don't really have a lot of free attention units to focus on why. And I think people who are more informed, who can come out and not with a hammer, but basically in a pleasant tone, say, look, there are a lot of reasons why you're working 3 jobs, that some of which might be changed if we went back to the successful actions of 4 years ago. And I think you've got to make it, but you've also got to not, as you said, lecture those people, but inform them and let them see that maybe there's an alternative. And like Trump said to a lot of audiences, what do you got to lose? You're already working 3 jobs. What do you got to lose?
Steve Hayes from Americans for Fair Taxation. That website is fairtax.org. Not .com. Brian, get it right. Steve's only been on the show like 5 times. I promise, Steve, next time you're on the show, I will lead with fairtax.org. And if I don't, you have every right to virtually slap me across the head. No, Steve, this has been a great conversation. I always enjoy having your take on the issues, specifically as we talk about economics, taxation, and I'm going to put this right now out there. Scott Hodge, you heard the challenge. Steve doesn't think you got it still, so come on the show. Prove him wrong. No, we're going to have a fun conversation between you two at some point here in the near future. And I think beyond, take away from today's episode, folks, is just as Steve said, get involved, get active, and go out and talk to your friends. And by the way, don't lead with an argument. Lead with value. Lead with the, we call it the what's in it for them statement, right? So think about that. What motivates your friends? What motivates your family? And with that, meet them where they're at on the issues they care about. Steve Hayes, I appreciate all the time this morning. With that being said, where can folks go ahead support you beyond going to fairtax.org, social medias, all that fun stuff, and any cool things coming down the pike?
Well, we're going to have some really interesting times between now and the election because we've got several states, Georgia, Nebraska, and Alabama, that are seriously, and North Carolina, looking at implementing a state version of the fair tax. And when they do that, they'll become income tax free and much more competitive with the states around them. You know, Tennessee is booming. Texas and Florida are two of the biggest economies in the world. And you've got a situation where we're going to see more and more states proving the fact that we need to go to a retail sales tax, and we need to do it as soon as we can.
Mm-hmm. Here. By the way, this is a good idea, right? Good ideas, when they are face-to-face with bad ideas, good ideas win. And the other benefit, as my hat will say, good ideas don't require force. With that being said, Steve, we really appreciate you coming on the show. And folks, if you got some value from today's episode, please go ahead, give it a share when you do tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever it is you consume your social media content. You can find The Brian Nichols Show. Also, as I mentioned, we've had Steve here on the show many a time. So if you want to check out some of those past episodes, head over to briannicholsshow.com. That is where we have the archives of all 860 plus episodes here of the program. And with that, by the way, we have both the podcast and the video versions of the show. Video, YouTube, Rumble. We are on Facebook, Twitter. The video version is uploaded in its entirety over there, as well as some clips of the show over on YouTube. So go ahead, give us some love, hit that subscribe button, hit that little notification bell, and of course, head down below into the comments. I know the libertarians are going to come out and say, don't you know that taxation is theft, Steve? Yes, he was a registered libertarian for 30 years. I think he knows that, and I think he also understands that that doesn't really work. When we go out and talk to people in real life, they say, okay, go take your boot and put it on your head somewhere. Yes, that. Otherwise, yes, we need to have open dialogue, open conversations, and yes, we all agree that taxation is theft, but how do we get there? One step at a time. How do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time, which, again, that's going to be a conversation between Steve and Scott here in the future. Now, for the podcast version of the show, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you consume your podcast content, hit that subscribe button, hit that download all unplayed episodes, because as I mentioned, yes, Steve's been on the show before, lots of past episodes, but that's also the only place beyond briannicholsshow.com you can access some of our spicier episodes, like when we were talking about the COVID insanity from 2020 to 2023, and YouTube, yes, inevitably went through and nuked some of our old episodes because we were harmful content. Oh, I love it. So if you want to check out some of those awesome episodes back during the heat of the pandemic, head to the show notes, head to your favorite podcast catcher, and check them out over there. And one final plug, folks, please support the folks who support us, and that is our amazing sponsors like Cardio Miracle, our studio sponsor, Amp America, Ebels CBD. We have our good friends over at Liquid Freedom Energy Tea, and more. All of them, they're going out of their way to support the show, so all I can ask from you is please support them, because they are, in fact, the ones who keep us having the lights on and having great conversations with folks like Steve. So, with that being said, Steve, any final words or thoughts here for the audience as we wrap things up today?
I very much appreciate what you're doing. We need to keep informing people, and I have total confidence that when they're informed, they'll make the right choice.
Hear, hear, and that's why on the Brian Nichols Show, we aim to do what? Educate, enlighten, and inform. With that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Steve Hayes from Americans for Fair Taxation. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.